All right, welcome to another episode of Mainly Hoops. Today we're going to be talking about the best bets for the first weekend of college basketball. So it's an exciting time. Got some great matchups. If you're liking the content, be sure to subscribe and like the videos below. So, Cody, starting off, we got UNC versus Kansas. What do you like here?
Yeah, well, I think you're going to like this one as a UNC fan. I'm going to go with the Tar Heels -1.5 against Kansas here in their first home game. It's just a pretty hype home spot here. I actually have this at UNC -4, so I actually see some value here regardless. But I mean, I'm higher on this UNC team than the consensus. I mean, KenPom has them in like the low 30s. I have them a little bit higher than that. I have them near like 19th or 20th rated in the country. But I think this is an offense that just fits a little bit better together than they did last year. Last year's perimeter group was just filled with more ball dominant pieces that kind of struggled to play off of each other. I think that was kind of the theme, and obviously the defense wasn't great either across the board. But I think this roster looks a little bit more interchangeable. I know people are talking about kind of, oh, they spent $14 million and they didn't really get a star on this roster. But I would kind of disagree with that as well. Like Caleb Wilson and Bogavac obviously have real star potential this season. But getting back to the perimeter group, like Evans, Trimble, and Bogavac, like I mentioned, and the reserve pieces, like I think they all provide like a nice blend of on-ball creation and off-ball shooting. Like Evans and Bogavac are like, I think, particularly great pieces to put by Trimble and Caleb Wilson's side, as Trimble and Wilson can kind of get downhill and create looks for these guys. But I mean, Evans and Bogavac are also capable of playing in ball screens, and they're also very capable secondary creators, which is why I kind of like how all these guys fit together. I guess my only concern in this game would be like maybe the front court depth or like the center depth of this UNC roster. Like outside of Vasar, there's not like a true center that I can really trust at this point in time, especially against a Kansas front line and roster as a whole that's super athletic and is probably going to be looking to get on the offensive glass. And obviously Darren Peterson's awesome as well. So UNC is going to have to switch up some things in their pick and roll coverage, maybe high hedge him a little bit more if he gets cooking against the UNC drop. But ultimately, I also don't really trust these Kansas off-ball guards and the off-ball shooting or just someone to help out Darren Peterson in general. So I am a little bit lower on this Kansas offense than the consensus is. Oh, this defense is really, really good, and I think they're going to be able to guard in space against this UNC team pretty well. But ultimately, I think this -1.5 number is short, especially for a Kansas team that's going on the road for the first time this year. It's always a tough spot to do in a regular season setting. So I'll definitely lay the 1.5 here regardless.
I like it. I'm with you on the major concern of the depth at the center position. It looks like Zayden High is going to get most of those minutes over James Brown, which he should be. But in the reports were really good about Zayden over the summer, but he struggled in the exhibitions in the first game. Very rough showing to open the season. So I think he's still going to get the bulk of those backup 5 minutes. I don't really see Henry as a guy you really want playing over 30, 32 minutes. That doesn't really suit him or his frame for that matter. But I'm with you on liking UNC here, even as a biased fan. But I just think the shooting potential of this team, but basically every rotation player, you're fine with taking an open three on this team. It's not all of their games, but Caleb Wilson can knock him down. Henry can step out. Zayden's hit multiple in preseason exhibitions. And even just the depth from the backcourt. I mean, Derek Dixon's going to get minutes even as a true freshman. He can really shoot it. Jonathan Powell coming off the bench can get hot, started most games for West Virginia. And so I think ultimately, even if some guys go cold, they have the pieces on the bench to someone's going to be able to make shots. And regardless, that should be able to keep them in the game. And so I'm with you there. Next, we can go on to some buy games that you like.
Yeah. I kind of put 4 of these together, and I'll start with, well, I'll mention them all first and then kind of just get into it a little bit as to why. I like Illinois laying the 27.5 is what it's at right now against Florida Gulf Coast. Kentucky -32.5 against Valpo. Arizona -28.5 against Utah Tech. And the Florida State line isn't out at the time of recording, but I like them at 20.5 or better against Alabama State. I put them all in this bucket because, these are all four of these teams are going to play with pace and have great offenses, which is the characteristic when trying to identify buy games with big spreads. I backed Illinois on opening night and obviously had success there. I think they were laying 30 or 29.5. They won 113-55 over Jackson State. It was never really a question. I think they were up like almost 40 at halftime. It's just a team with a lot of depth, and their front court, I think can kind of dominate inferior opponents. So that's another reason why I would go with Illinois. I think they're going to get Stojakovic back as well, from what I heard. I think Petrovic is still out, but this team has a ton of scoring depth. They can play 10 or 11 deep when Stojakovic is in the mix. So I like Illinois there, laying a big number. Florida State, they really ramped up the pressure against Alcorn State I believe that was on opening night, or actually on Wednesday. They won 108-76. And, if they're going to ramp up the pressure, play super fast. And I like what I saw from the offense. Rob McCray running the show had 17 assists. And they have a bunch of shooting around him to be able to execute there. And they can get on the offensive glass against inferior opponents as well. But if they're able to ramp up the pressure, force turnovers against Alabama State, I think that could be a potential runaway. So I'm going to lay the 20.5 there. And then Arizona, I mean, this is always a team that I identify in these spots, a team that plays super, super fast. They have a ton of size up front. Obviously, like Koa Pete was able to kind of handle the Florida front court, which is widely known as the best front court in the country, at least depth wise. And then they have a few other guys up front, and Iwaka and Krivas, and then Karchenkov on the wing is like 6'7", 240 pounds. Like, they just have a ton of size here that can kind of just dominate by game competition. I would have liked this a little bit more if they were coming off of a loss, but ultimately early in the season, I think motivation doesn't really wither away after one game. So I'm not too worried about that. And Tommy Lloyd is 12-5 against the spread as a double-digit non-conference home favorite in his career at Arizona. So it checks out, and his style obviously allows this trend to check out. And then with the final one with Kentucky, I backed them on Tuesday. They didn't get the cover against Nichols, 7-51, but their offense was pretty poor in that first game, and they still almost had a chance to cover that game. At one point, they were up 33, and it kind of just fizzled away from them in the last 3 minutes. But this is a team that has a ton of depth. It's a team that's going to play fast and has a great offense. Again, that's what I like to identify. They're going to be getting Jalen Lowe back for his Kentucky debut, and that's kind of the missing piece with this offense is having that point guard to be able to run the show. So with him, whether he gets 10 or 15 minutes, if he gets 20 minutes, just having that presence out there is going to be really good for Kentucky. And this is a team that realistically can play 14 guys that can provide serviceable minutes. And, in a situation where it comes down to the last 5 or 6 minutes and you're throwing out, 5 guys that would be the best players against these bye game opponents, I think that's definitely a feather in Kentucky's cap. And, Mark Pope, since his last year at BYU, since they were in the Big 12, his teams are 14-5 as a double-digit non-conference home favorite, and it checks out. Obviously, his teams have played with more physicality. They always have a lot of depth, and their offenses are always great, and they're fun to watch. So I'm going to back all 4 of those teams to get it done. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it's not fun laying these massive numbers, but ultimately, it's something that you have to do at times.
I also think another kind of interesting thing about it with the net rankings over the past couple of years is that it takes into account how much you beat these bad teams by. Whether I agree with that or not, I don't, frankly. It is beneficial for these teams to win by 40 versus 20. And so I think it makes some of those big lines more enticing because it's not one of those things where it doesn't matter, a win's a win. For the rankings purposes, it's not. So I think that's it makes me feel a little better on some of these big spreads.
Right.
Yeah. What about, so for the rest of Friday, besides UNC and Kansas and some of those big games, are there any other games that you like tomorrow?
Yeah, there's a few others. I like McNeese State getting 4 against Santa Clara. It's a roster that, I just think is pretty well put together despite Will Wade walking out the door. He's a coach that's coming in. His name is actually escaping me right now. I'll find Bill Armstrong, who worked with him at LSU. He was able to put together a pretty good roster, was able to retain Javon Garcia and DJ Richards, and was also able to bring in a guy like Garway Dwall, who's going to fit in very well defensively. I don't watch him play offense because it's pretty disgusting to watch at times. But ultimately, this is a roster that kind of fits what a Will Wade kind of team wants to do. And I think this defense can really get after a Santa Clara team that has some, I would call it dicey guard play. I know they still have some on-ball talent on the wings, but their shooting is a bit lacking compared to last year. And their offensive rebounding ability isn't quite where it was at last year, which is an area that you can get these McNeese State teams that, are always kind of playing in rotation and it leaves them vulnerable on the glass. They don't have a Christoph Tilley or like a Cameron Tongue walking through that door anymore. They have Jake Ensminger is still there, but ultimately I don't think they're going to have that same offensive rebounding edge that they had last year when they were able to go on the road at McNeese and beat them. I like McNeese to get their revenge. One other one to mention, I hate taking underdogs kind of in this day and age. Just it feels like the talent disparity is just like off the charts compared to past years, obviously with all these players getting poached. And, Sam Houston was kind of a victim of that. They lost Lamar Wilkerson to Indiana. They lost Khalifa Sacco to Houston. So like their best players are just kind of getting plucked. And also I will applaud Lamar Wilkerson for giving back to Sam Houston after he got that NIL deal. I believe he gave like, what was it, 100,000 back to Sam Houston.
Yeah, it was something
honestly,
significant.
Yeah, I think those schools should have to pay a fee to the schools that they're poaching these players from. I think that would be kind of it's like a transfer fee almost, kind of like in European soccer, stuff like that. I think that would be pretty cool. But I actually like Sam Houston getting 28 at Texas Tech. There's a caveat here, obviously. Like if JT Toppin, Watts, and Bamgoy sit out again, I think that would be the reason why I go in this area. I mean, Christian Anderson played as good as you can possibly play on an opening night, but this is a team that has their depth concerns. Obviously, some of the guys that had to slide in the other night, they had to start 3 freshmen, and they actually all played pretty well. I mean, albeit it was against Lindenwood, so I'm not going to put like a ton of stock into that. And Sam Houston's like a more formidable opponent, and if those guys don't play, I have some concerns about the defensive depth, like the front court depth overall, and then. Obviously Atwell and Bryan are still there as shooters, but I worry about the shooting a little bit more as well. So I'll consider Sam Houston. I think a couple of those guys play as like a tune-up for their game against Illinois next week, but I think they're sitting out as more like precautionary reasons because, that game those guys got ruled out like 2 minutes before tip-off. So I think they're going to end up being okay. Then one other one that I just had mentioned, I'm probably going to stay away from this one, but I did lean towards Utah State -3 against VCU. I'm just a little bit lower on that VCU offense overall. And I think their lines are a little bit inflated just because of kind of what they are as a program. I kind of need to see it from Phil Martelli Jr. coming from Bryant over to VCU. His defenses have always been great, and they have a ton of length and athleticism there, but his offenses have kind of been a step behind. They're very ISO driven, and I kind of worry about some of those guys when it comes to getting to the rim at a high clip. And they're playing against this Utah State zone that can kind of throw some teams off. They're pretty good in transition. And I think this is a VCU offense that could get a little bit transition reliant. So I kind of like the matchup for Utah State tomorrow.
Yeah. I like that idea of having a little transfer fee to give to the mid-major schools. I actually think that could solve a lot of problems in today's game, especially when
100%.
you're some of these mid-major guys, $1 million to go be a bench player for a Power 4 school.
Right. It's either that, or some people have mentioned, like, if you take a team's player, then you have to go play them in a road game the next season. So like Indiana would have to go travel to Sam Houston to play a game. Houston would have to travel there as well to go play a road game.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of these big schools would be scheduling 7-8 road games against non-conference teams.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. It would be kind of funny though.
It'd be a lot of fun, actually. Yeah, so that's kind of what your thoughts are on Friday. What about some early thoughts on lines that are out for the weekend slate? Got Saturday, got some good games with Alabama, St. John's, Michigan State, Arkansas, and there's a few more on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into too much depth. I know a few of these lines are out, but for the most part, I don't really want to, spiel about lines that, aren't really out yet. And if I talk about a game and the line comes out completely different, I'm not going to go crazy about these games, but I do actually lean St. John's -6.5 against Alabama. It kind of seems like a steep price, and I'm not super high on St. John's overall, but I think I am kind of in line where Ken Palm has them. I mean, I think they have them at what is it, like 16th right now? I think they have them rated 14th right now. I have them 15th personally in my ratings. I'm a little bit lower on Alabama, especially if Holloway and Wrightsell are unable to go. I think it really takes away from their off-ball shooting. It's going to be a bit lacking, and Alabama kind of relied on some of their freshmen to slide in. I view them as more wing defenders and good athletes in transition as opposed to off-ball shooters overall. But I do think this is a Johnny's team, a Johnny's offense that can kind of punish a lacking Bama front line. With the center rotation, I'm a little bit lower on the Williamson Sherrell center duo especially for a Nate Oates defense that puts a lot of responsibility on centers on their plates in the deep drop coverage that they run consistently. I think these St. John's guards and the bigs are going to be able to get downhill and score on them at the rim and punish them on the glass a little bit as well. They're not the greatest defensive rebounders out there, but ultimately, yeah. And like I mentioned, if Holloway and Wrightsell are out, it's very crucial for their off-ball shooting, as they won't be able to capitalize on the open catch and shoot jumpers that LeBaron Philon is going to be able to generate. So I make this line 8.5 without Holloway and Wrightsell in the mix. But if those two guys go, which I think there is a chance that they end up playing, I think Holloway has a better chance than Wrightsell, but I would make this closer to the current number if those guys play. So it's probably a stay away if those guys are out.
Yeah, I think Alabama fans have to be pretty disappointed with how Williamson has looked in the exhibitions and the first game. Well, not only looked, made more lack of chances. He hasn't really played much. And he was I can't remember what he was ranked in the transfer portal, but he was pretty highly touted. And I think they paid a pretty big price tag to bring him in. And so that's definitely seemed like, for me, it's been a pretty big disappointment so far.
Yeah, they brought him in before the season had even ended, I believe.
Yeah.
I remember I was doing some scouting stuff on him before the week of the Final Four, so they were in on him pretty early, and I understood like the upside with him, as like a pick and pop threat, and there's some rim protection upside there, but you're coming from the Patriot League where there's not really a lot of teams putting pressure on the rim, so he was able to kind of get away with it, and he was a little bit of a post hub there at Bucknell as well, so maybe he hasn't translated as well as Nate Oates thought.
Yeah. What about any other games you like on Saturday?
Yeah, I do have some other ones. I do like San Francisco. If they're going to be getting 8 points at Memphis, which I highly doubt they're going to end up getting 8, but I would play this down to 5.5. The main reason I love fading Memphis as a favorite against like competent competition. It's just their erratic style just kind of leads to a lot of different outcomes. So I'll kind of always put the points in my back pocket. But this is also a San Francisco roster that I actually like quite a bit. They were able to retain Beasley and Tyrone Riley, who I think is a real breakout candidate this year. He showed a lot of flashes on both ends of the floor. I especially like him as a transition and rim threat, and he's a great defender as well. His jump shot's coming along, and I think there is a little bit of a year 2 leap in store for him with extra usage. He didn't get a super high usage, obviously, with Marcus Williams and Malik Thomas on the ball so much. He obviously wasn't going to be the first guy in line, but I think now that those guys are out the door and the backcourt is definitely a little bit more inferior than it was. They also got Masic from Portland, actually a former UMaine guard as well. Masic, he was there in like 2022 or something like that. I think he's actually really good in pick and roll as like a stabling presence there. But I really do like Tyrone Riley, and I also hopefully Newberry is back in the mix at the 4. He's a really good connector piece, a really good floor spacer, and he's a great defender as well. But he's, I think, still coming off of that season-ending leg injury from last year. So, but yeah, I definitely like San Francisco in this spot. I like how their size and their athleticism can kind of match up with a Memphis team that looked really bad in the exhibition games. To be quite honest, I don't like taking the exhibition games into account, but also when Penny Hardaway says that he's finally just adding in his offensive and defensive sets, I don't really like that for a team's outlook when you had a whole summer to kind of figure that out. So, I mean, most of the time with Memphis is kind of just roll the ball out there and play, but which obviously it helps them more in an underdog situation. But it really allows these when they're a favorite, it really allows these underdogs to hang around.
Yeah, they don't have PJ Haggerty to save them this
No,
season.
they don't. They definitely don't. They have Doug McDaniel, who I think they think he's the PJ Haggerty, and they have some other guys in the mix that are obviously fine. Like, I mean, Aaron Bradshaw in the front court, he's going to be good in the American. But ultimately, I think this San Francisco team is a team that can kind of they have a chance in the WCC. I don't think they're going to win the league, but they can definitely compete with Gonzaga and St. Mary's this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have a couple other ones that I'll mention. Actually, speaking of Gonzaga, I like them laying 10.5 against Oklahoma. I just think they can smoke Oklahoma in the front court. I was a little bit discouraged to see that Kai Rogers didn't play. I don't think there's an injury there. I didn't look into it too much, but he didn't get any minutes. They played Cool Atak as the backup big, and when Wagi gets into foul trouble, which it's pretty inevitable, and especially against this front court of Graham Ike and Braden Huff, I think this is a team that's brittle up front, and Gonzaga they'll run all their actions through the post, particularly in the half court, and I think they can smash Oklahoma in that area, especially playing a semi-home game, which is it's basically a full home game. They're playing in the Spokane Memorial Gym or whatever you call it, but it's a home game, and they've smashed teams in there before. They played there plenty of times to where they're familiar with that venue. And then one final one, I'll just kind of talk about my broader thoughts about Michigan State and Arkansas. I actually have like a slight lean to Michigan State, which sounds like maybe a little bit crazy. I like it from a matchup sense. I think they can take Arkansas out of transition. These Coach Cal offenses have been fairly transition reliant. Obviously, their half court offense is going to get much better with Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas in the mix. Guys that like Acuff can operate and pick and roll at a high level, and they didn't really have that last year. Boogie Flan was in the mix, but he kind of struggled in the time that he was there. Obviously, he's more talented than what he showed last year, but I think Acuff, being healthy and being that stabling presence is going to be really big for them. And Malik Thomas just adding to the off-ball shooting. If Carter Knox is in the mix, I think that'll be a real help too. He didn't play in the first game, but ultimately, I do like Michigan State's ability to keep them out of transition, which is going to bring down Arkansas's offensive value, and then the Spartans' ability to get on the glass against Arkansas, I think will be evident in this game. Arkansas is a better defensive rebounding team, but I still think it's a little bit of a weakness compared to past Coach Cal teams. So I like Sparty to control the pace in this game, especially playing at home. And I just think the line is like a fraction short. I would make this closer to 2.5 overall. So I'm probably not gonna be on the side in this game, but just to give like my broader thoughts on the game, just since it was a bigger game.
Yeah, that's a real interesting one to me because I really like Arkansas's roster this season. I think this roster has real Final Four potential. It's kind of how it comes together, and it's kind of the exact opposite of how I see this Michigan State roster, where it's one of the, I don't know how to say this nicely, but just more untalented Michigan State teams I've ever seen. You're counting on a lot of guys to take leaps, and I love watching Cohen Carr. The athleticism is off the charts, but I still don't know if he can score the ball outside of 5 to 6 feet. So I'm really excited to see this game actually, and I think it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a concern with Michigan State. They're kind of just going to live on their ability to get out in transition and get on the offensive glass as well, and hope that Trey Fort and Kurt Tang knock down a couple threes in the process to kind of help them out. But yeah, the offense hasn't looked pretty, particularly in the half court setting. Like they turn the ball over a little bit too often as well, especially, or at least what they're projected to do, and the shooting just isn't there.
Yeah, I think if they can't take care of the ball against, and they let Arkansas get out into these live ball fast break turnovers, it could get ugly.
Yeah,
I think I could see Michigan State losing by getting blown out if they're not able to take care of the ball early.
Absolutely. I would agree. That's why I'm kind of staying off it. I don't project this Michigan State offense to be all that great this year.
Yeah. And I know we're getting a little far away now, but what about to end the weekend off? Any thoughts on games Sunday?
Yeah, I had one game in mind, and it was Indiana. They're projected to lay 1.5 or 2 against Marquette. And I'm high on Indiana. I think I would have them about where Ken Palm has them in like the low 30s range, but I do kind of like how they match up against this Marquette defense. They have a lot of pieces that are able to take care of the ball and knock down threes as well. With DeVries, Wilkerson, Tate Connerway, and Enright, like they're all capable of manning point guard duties. And then Reed Bailey at the 5 as well is able to kind of handle the ball and make decisions as more of a skill-based big. And I think that's kind of how you beat this Marquette defense overall. And Indiana on the defensive side can take Marquette out of transition, which I think Marquette is going to be extremely transition reliant this year. Just the lack of on-ball talent, the lack of like a high-level ball screen operator in the half court, I think is going to muck some things up for this Marquette offense overall. I did kind of like what I saw from some of the depth pieces the other day. Obviously, Ross and Lowry was pretty good as well. He had a nice night, but guys like Nigel James and Adrian Stevens for Marquette were solid in the small amount of minutes that they played. So I actually think they have more depth than people perceive them to have. But ultimately, I still view them as they're going to be more of a transition reliant offense. One thing is like Indiana's not going to get on the glass against this Marquette team. They're just going to value getting back in transition. And I think that's a fine proposition against this Marquette offense that has some things to work out.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this game as well because Marquette's really not adapting to the transfer portal era. But I'm also interested because if I recall correctly, I think this is their best incoming class of freshmen that they've had in quite some time. So I feel like it's something that's not talked about quite enough, that you talk about how hard it is to bring together all these new transfer portal players. But I think it's just as hard in some cases to ensure that your guys that are returning take that next step that Marquette, some of their guys are going to have to take if they're going to be anywhere close to what they've been in years past.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have four stars coming in, like 4 guys inside the top 110. I think 3 of them played the other night. Like I mentioned, Stevens and James, they provided some good minutes, and they can realistically play 12 deep if they really wanted to. And some other guys have stepped up into larger roles. They got Sean Jones back from the ACL injury. He sat out all year, but I'm not that high on him from an offensive perspective. But Ross and Lowry are going to need to take that next step, and they've been able to hit on some of these guys that were able to kind of wait in line. Yeah. Obviously, Kolek didn't really wait in line, but he was a guy that kind of broke out a few years ago. Yeah. Cam Jones was kind of waiting to finally step in and play the point guard position. He was awesome last year for the most part. He kind of struggled as a shooter later on, but now it's up to Chase Ross and Zayd Lowry to kind of take over. And I'm just not as high on them to be great distributors compared to Jones and Kolek.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So any other games, or?
That is it for me. I mean, obviously, like this week overall has been like, I would say underwhelming. Obviously, like the Wednesday, Thursday slates have been pretty underwhelming. I wish there were some better games in there, but I know next week and then obviously the week after, I believe, is Feast Week. So we're going to have some better games on tap. We'll be able to talk about more like overarching thoughts about some like much better games. We're not going to talk about 5 like bye game blowouts anymore. So I'll be excited to get into like the much better games. But for now, yeah, that's it for me.
All right, great. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed this. Make sure, like I said before, subscribe and be on the lookout for new videos incoming when we got some better matchups coming.
Yep.